Hi everybody, this is Brad with W3 Total Cache, and today we're going to take a look at page caching. Now there's different types of caching. There's page caching, which is what we're looking at, but there's also object caching, database caching, browser caching. But again, today, just page caching. And before we get into any technical talk, I want to look at a real life example at a math teacher named Miss Watson. She has 30 students, and what she's trying to do is create a math test for all 30 students. So the first thing that she needs to do is to actually create the first math test. You know, she's got to go through and create all the questions that are going to be on that test. So the first one is done, and now there's 29 more to go. Now imagine if she was to write these out by hand, and it took 2 minutes each. If she has to do 30 of them, it's going to take a total of 1 hour. It's going to take 60 minutes. But imagine she took that first test to the photocopier and made 29 copies. It'd be a lot faster that way. So it will take 2 minutes to create the first test, and then less than a minute to create the other 29 copies. So again, here's a summary. If she did it by hand, 2 minutes each, a total of 1 hour. But if she used the photocopier, the first test would take 2 minutes, but to create the additional 29 tests, it would just take a minute. So we're looking at 60 minutes versus 3 minutes. There's a huge difference in time. And that is page caching. This math teacher, Miss Watson, just used page caching. So caching is the process of storing a copy of something so that when you need it next time, you just take the copy and serve it, rather than having to rebuild everything from scratch. And then page is specifying the fact that we cached the entire page, not just parts of it, but the whole page. That's page caching. Now, if we take a look at a WordPress example, let's say yourdomain.com, you have one visitor, and your goal is to create the home page. Now, if we were to get technical and ask ourselves, how does WordPress create your website? Well, there's lots of files involved in WordPress. And if we start with the index file, there's a couple definitions at the top. And one of the first files it's going to include is version.php. And if we go down this rabbit hole, right, this file has version information. So in this case, it's version 6.7 alpha. And it's got the database version of 57155, etc. Now we've got to go back to the index file and load compat.php. And this is a file containing PHP functions that are either missing from older PHP versions or not included. And you can see the list on the right-hand side there. And if we go back again to index, the next thing it's got to do is load.php. And this file has almost 2,000 lines of code in it, and these are just defining the functions that are needed to load WordPress. Finally, in this example, there's another check that says WP check PHP MySQL versions. It runs that function to make sure all the necessary versions are installed. So we're going to stop going down this rabbit hole, but it goes on and on and on. There's thousands and thousands of lines of code that get executed. Now, if we weren't going to look at it from the code level, but at a higher level, these are some of the actions and hooks and filters that are ran. I'm not going to go over all of them, but you know, the very first one is the must-use plugins are loaded. Then it's got to load taxonomies and post types. Then it's got to load the plugins. It's got to set up the theme. It's got to parse the request and send headers. You know, it's got to set up the header and print styles, sidebars, footers. Like, there's a ton of stuff. Overall, there's a lot of work that happens to build your WordPress page. But let's say one page takes 2 seconds to build. And if you're going to build 30 of them, that's 1 minute. That's 60 seconds. But what if we took that first page we created and saved a copy of it? So we'll just store it in a folder called cache. So building it from scratch takes 2 seconds each, but the cached version of the page, it still takes 2 seconds to build it the first time. But to create an additional 29 copies, that's going to take less than a second. So again, we're looking at 3 minutes. Actually, that's wrong. We're looking at less than 3 seconds versus about 60 seconds. So a huge difference. So that is page caching, where you build the page the first time, and then you just save a copy of it. Now, how does page cache work with W3 Total Cache? So the first thing you'll have to do if you don't have it installed is install W3 Total Cache. And in the general settings, there's a section for page cache, and all you have to do is enable it and go with the default, which is disk enhanced for the page cache method. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a folder in your WP content directory named cache and then page enhanced. Now right now it's empty because I haven't visited the site and built any cache files. However, the first time we access the sample page, you can see here that it's created a couple additional folders to help organize it, but there's a HTML file in there, and this is the cached version of that page. So the next time someone accesses the sample page, instead of loading WordPress and running through all those lines of code and those hooks and filters, it's got the built page. It just serves it. It's a lot faster this way. A flow chart, if you want to look at it this way, the very first time the user visits your website, is there a cached version of the page? There's not going to be. So it has to load WordPress, build the page, serve the user a freshly built copy of that page, but then it saves a copy of it to the cache. That way, the next time someone accesses that same web page, it asks, is there a cached copy? And yes, it serves the cached version of the page. And this makes a huge impact when you're looking at scale. You know, if you got 1 or 2 people loading your site, that's one thing, but when you've got thousands and thousands of people loading your site, this page caching will go a long way to make sure your site runs smoothly. So that's it. That's a brief overview of page caching. And I hope you enjoyed that. And in our future tutorials, we're going to get more in depth on setting up page caching and the different scenarios that come up and the advanced settings that are available to help with those scenarios. All right. Thank you very much.